Green Bay, Wisconsin this morning, and I used to live here, so I'm just an honor. It's just really an honor to be back. I'm going to start out by sharing my story, really from the beginning, just so that it all makes sense. But I grew up in Lake Villa, actually, it's about an hour north of Chicago, and I grew up really. I feel like I had an all-American sort of childhood. I had everything that I needed, I had most of what I wanted, and there weren't any major trials or tragedies in my life as a kid, so I grew up just sort of thinking life would always be really wonderful and carefree. It wasn't until I got into junior high that I started to realize that there were wars going on in the world, that homelessness was an issue, that sexual abuse was an issue, and all sorts of other things, and I became burdened by all of that. And I remember in 8th grade just feeling like I wanted to do something to make a difference in the world. So I started volunteering at a local homeless shelter. And I did that on Friday nights for about a year. And at the end of that year, I looked around and it looked to me like homelessness was just as much of an issue then from when I had started a year before. And I felt like I wasn't making much of a difference. So I put helping other people in the back of my mind as I went into high school. And I just started to focus on trying to make myself, my family, and my friends happy. And that seemed like it was working for the first couple of years, but very quickly and very unexpectedly, a number of things started to go wrong. Within about a year and a half's time, I lost 4 friends, one in a motorcycle accident, one in a car accident, one because of suicide, and one to a brain tumor. And on top of the friends that I lost, my grandmother passed away and I was raped within that year and a half. And I didn't know how to handle any of it. I didn't know that I could go to God for comfort, wisdom, strength, peace, understanding. I really had no idea. So I just kind of pushed everything down. I was sort of the friend that everybody went to for help with their problems. So I just put a smile on my face and I pretended like I was okay. And I spiraled down into a really deep and scary depression. And I didn't know how bad I was doing. Most of the people around me, even my parents, didn't know how bad I was doing. They knew something was wrong, so they took me to see counselors and doctors, and everybody just said I was fine physically. It must be psychological. But nobody ever used the word depression. They thought maybe I had anxiety. Nobody ever used the word depression. So I continued on through high school, and eventually New Year's Eve of my senior year came. And I was supposed to be grounded because I had been skipping classes and skipping school and getting sick a lot. But my parents were going to let me go out that one night. And we kind of made an agreement that I would come home, but I decided as I left the house that I wasn't going to come home at all that night. And it wasn't until after midnight that I called my mom to tell her I wasn't coming home. And I hung up before she could even respond. And it wasn't until the next morning when I did go home, like I said I was going to do. And when I walked in the door, my parents were just beside themselves because they were always very loving and concerned and, active in my life and careful about where I was. They always knew where I was. So I remember my mom said something like, "Kristen, we didn't know if you were dead in a ditch somewhere or what had happened to you." And I felt bad. I really wasn't trying to worry them or make them concerned or frustrate them or anything. I was really just doing, at that point, whatever made me feel better, whatever made me feel good, whatever made me feel better, I did that because I was just trying to survive. And so I went to sleep that day, and I slept the whole day. It was like a Saturday night, so I slept the whole night into the morning. And when I woke up in the morning, it just happened to be a Sunday morning. And in our family, on Sunday mornings, we went to church. And I went to church like I always did. And I just remember feeling, as I walked in, very broken, very lost, very confused, very disillusioned, unsure what tomorrow was going to hold. And I walked out feeling exactly the same way. And when I went back home, my mom laid down to take a nap because she was tired from the night that she had stayed up waiting for me. And I went to put on some videos of my nephews opening their Christmas presents at the time. They were just like really cute and little at the time, so I thought that might put a smile on my face and cheer me up a little bit. So I put those videos on, and as I watched the videos, I started to lighten up a little bit, and it did put a smile on my face. But while I was watching those videos, my best friend called. And my best friend's name was Kelly, and we had been best friends since we were in 2nd grade. And she wanted me to come over to her house and make gingerbread houses because it was our last day of Christmas break before we were supposed to go back to school. And I always say I didn't always make the best decisions with Kelly. We decided that I couldn't get in any worse trouble if I left. So I very dishonestly wrote a note to my parents saying that I was going for a walk, and I walked to the end of the street where my friends picked me up, and I went to Kelly's house for about 3 hours. And we never made gingerbread houses, but about 3 hours later, another friend dropped me off at the end of the street because they didn't want to get in trouble for taking me. So I walked home, and as I started walking home, it was almost like my legs wouldn't take me there. I just was empty is really what it was. So I walked to the pizza restaurant that I had begun working in, and I got my paycheck, and I just tried to waste time as best as I could. I knew I needed to go home, but I just felt like I needed more time to think and to myself. So I wasted time for about half an hour, and then I felt like I needed to go home. So I started to walk home, and I just wasn't ready. So I walked across the street instead of to home, and across the street was this park that I grew up playing in. It was like a park with a beach and a volleyball court and a basketball court and swings and everything. So I remember as I went into the park, starting to think about all these happy and joyful childhood memories that I had playing in that park as a kid. And as I was swinging on the swings, I started to contrast these like happy, joyful childhood memories that I had with how I was feeling now as a teenager. So broken, so disillusioned, so lost, confused, so empty. And I felt like no matter what I did, as I thought about it, I felt like no matter what I tried, no matter what I prayed, no matter what I did, it felt like I was just going in circles, like it was never getting better. It seemed like one bad thing just happened after another, after another, after another, and it was never gonna get better. And as I was thinking about this, I remembered that in this small town that I grew up in, Lake Villa, you're not supposed to be in the park after dark there. And that's just like a rule they have for safety's sake. And I knew that if the police saw me there, they would make me go home. But the reason that I was there was because I didn't want to go home yet. So I looked around to see where else I could go to just think and have some space. And so I looked around, and about 30 feet away from me was a train that was parked on the edge of the park. And it hadn't moved at all, so I figured it wasn't going anywhere, and I decided that I would go over to the train and sit on it. And this wasn't something I normally did. I didn't really ever play on the trains or train tracks, even though I grew up so close to them. I always stayed far away, but this day I decided to sit on there. And as I was sitting there, I remembered this thought process that I'd had about 3 months beforehand. And that was as I was grieving through my friend Brandon's death. My friend Brandon is the friend that I lost to suicide. And his death was the hardest for me. I remember thinking as I grieved through his death, I could never do that. I could never take my life, especially the way that he did that. How could he do that? But then my thought process sort of changed, and I started to think, well, even though I would never do it, if I would ever do it, since I would never do it the way that he did it, how would I do it? And it was just kind of a real twisted thought process, but I started to go through a number of things that I'd heard about or read about or seen on TV, and none of them seemed like they necessarily made sense or would work. But then a train started to go by my parents' house, and I could feel the power of the train shake our home. I could hear the whistle blare through the windows, and it just sort of snapped in my mind. That's one way I could never live through it. And I never thought about it again until 3 months later when I was sitting on the tracks that day. It was totally hypothetical. I wasn't serious at all. But when I remembered that thought process, sitting on the tracks, sitting on the train that day, I just started to think about that and if maybe that's what I should do. You know, in all reality, I knew it wasn't the answer, but I didn't know what the answer was. So I was back and forth in my mind, and I would think, it's going to get better, and then I would think it's not going to get any better, and then I would think there's a reason I'm here, and then I would think there's no reason I'm here, and then I would think there's something I'm supposed to do here, and then I would think there's nothing I'm supposed to do here. And I was back and forth like that for, I believe, about an hour and a half until a train started to come. And I hadn't made a decision. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't want to die. I just wanted my life to get a little better. And it felt like it never was going to. So as the train got closer, I made the impulsive decision to get off the train that I was sitting on and lay down on the tracks. And I remember as I got off the train just trying to push down the fear and the shame that I felt on the inside, because I knew this wasn't the answer, this wasn't the right decision, this wasn't what I was supposed to do, but I just didn't know what the right decision or the right answer was. So I pushed down the fear, I pushed down the shame, I closed my eyes, I laid down, and I turned my head in the opposite direction of where the train was coming from. And it was only about a split second before the train started to go over me. And what I felt when the train first started to go over me is I felt my hair, my shoulders, and the midsection of my body just start to rise and get like sucked up into the train. And very quickly after that, I felt something push me down and hold me down firmly until the train came to a stop. And I had no idea what was happening. I had no clue what was happening. And when it stopped, I didn't even know if I was alive or dead. I remember as I heard it screech to a stop, just looking around to see if I was alive or dead, if this was just like a terrible dream, what had just really happened, because it all happened so fast. And as I looked around and unclenched my fist, I looked around, and when I looked behind me to my right, about 10 feet behind me on my right, I saw my legs. And I knew immediately that they were my legs because they had these bright white tennis shoes on that I just gotten for Christmas. And it just didn't feel real. It didn't feel like this could be my real life. This had to be a nightmare. This had to be a bad dream. This could not be my real life. So I sort of gathered myself emotionally as best as I could, and I used my arms to crawl out from underneath the train. And as I got to the side of the tracks, I just started to look down to see if they were really gone. And it was so dark out, and my left leg had been severed so high, I didn't see anything there. So I turned my attention to my right leg, which looked like it had been severed below the knee, but I had never seen my leg like that before. I had never even seen an amputated leg before. So I took my hand and I ran it below where it looked like it had been severed. And when I did that, I unintentionally brought my hand up to my face. And when I brought my hand up to my face, I saw all of the blood. And the pain sort of hit me in that moment. I realized that I was alive. I realized that my legs were gone and that I was bleeding. And so I cried harder than anytime I ever had before in my life. And I was definitely in the worst pain I had ever been in my life. And I started crying for my mom the way a small child would. And my mom always has a hard time with that part of the story because she was actually out looking for me. But as I cried, harder than I'd ever cried in my life, and the worst pain I had ever been in my life, God just came near in a way that I could feel and see and hear better, more than ever before. And what I remember hearing and seeing and feeling is this. All of a sudden, this peace just covered me. Like the pain was just in the background. I was covered with peace, and I started hearing the song Amazing Grace play over and over and over in my mind. And I just remember thinking, like, that could only be music from heaven. Like, I'm probably just gonna have to lay here and wait and pray that I die and go to heaven. Like, I just did not really know what to expect. And so I lay there resting in that peace, just hoping, praying, and waiting to die. And as I laid there, all of a sudden I felt somebody pull my hair off my face and behind my ear. And I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea who that could be. Wasn't expecting anybody to find me. Unfortunately, I didn't want anybody to find me. And it says in the police report that the conductor said to the engineer, "Did you see that yellow flash?" And the engineer said to the conductor, "Yes, I think we just hit someone." So they had called 911. The yellow flash they saw was my yellow jacket as I laid down on the tracks. So they called 911, and it was not long after that they found me. I guess there were paramedics and firefighters that were walking the tracks from Antioch and Lake Villa trying to find me, and it was a firefighter that found me first. And I remember as he pulled my hair off my face and behind my ear, I sort of like looked up to see what that could be, and he sort of stumbled back because he wasn't expecting me to be alive. And something inside me just rose up because I was embarrassed, I was ashamed, I didn't even know what to say. But he radioed to the other medical personnel of my location and my status, and they decided they wanted to flight for life me actually to a hospital in Milwaukee because I was in that bad of shape, but they couldn't because it was so cold and foggy out. So they did something that I've been told they've never done stents. That wasn't protocol that they had never done before, and this was that they blocked all of the roads and intersections from where I was to the closest hospital in the area that could take me, and that was in McHenry. And it says in the police report that it's normally a 45-minute drive, but that they got me there in 8 minutes. And I remember as I got to the hospital, them asking me what my name was, what my parents' name was, what my sister's name was, what their phone numbers were, and I was able to answer all of their questions. And they were really like trying to prep me for surgery, but right before they started to wheel me down the hall, I remember hearing the nurses and the paramedics in the corner talking about how they felt like they were witnessing some sort of a miracle. And I remember thinking, like, they can't be talking about me, you know, that can't be true. I don't know why they're saying that, and not really even wanting to be a miracle. And I found out later the reason that they were saying that was because I had lost 8 pints of blood, and I guess scientifically you're supposed to die after you lose 5. But I was still very much alive, conscious, talking, able to answer all of their questions. And as they wheeled me down to the operating room, I remember looking up at the doctor, like in the white coat right next to me, and asking him if he thought I was going to live or die. I was really hoping to just get some type of answer. And as we went into surgery that night, he told me he didn't know. And he says that he told me that because he wanted me to go into surgery that night, fighting to die, fighting to live. One way or another, he just wanted me to go into surgery that night, fighting. And I was in surgery the whole night. Actually, they tried to reattach my legs, which is something they weren't successful at doing, and did a number of blood transfusions. And it wasn't until the next day, early afternoon, that I opened my eyes for the first time. And I remember as I opened my eyes, as I started to wake up, I saw my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, and my brother-in-law all in the room with their arms crossed and their heads looking down at the floor. And my first thought was, wow, something really bad must have just happened, because I didn't remember the events from the night before right away. But my mom's eyes met with mine, and she just ran to the side of my bed and she said, "Oh honey, we're so glad you're okay." And I said, "Mom, they cut my clothes and they cut my coat." And she said, "It's okay, we can get you new ones. We're just glad you're okay." And I sort of listened to that and fell back asleep. I was on a lot of medication. And the next thing I remember was waking up and having the doctor come in to tell me what my injuries were. And I just was actually sort of rude to him. He came in and tried to give me hope. He told me that my left leg was severed well above the knee, my right leg was severed directly below the knee, but that I might be able to walk with the use of prosthetic legs one day. He was really just keeping it real, trying to give me some hope. But I wasn't ready, so I kind of just stared out the window. I didn't say hi, I didn't say bye, I didn't say thank you. I sort of pretended it wasn't happening. And the next thing I remember was having my friend call. I was really feeling sort of gross and icky, and I'm sure I had blood, sweat, and tears on me. So I asked my mom to call her. And when she called back, she just asked me how I was doing. And I had no idea how to answer her. I remember thinking I had to tell her something because she was my best friend. We've been friends since we were little. I had to tell her something. So I looked down at my legs, and when I looked down at them, even with a sheet covering them, I could tell that they were gone. They were mostly gone. And I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "I'm okay, but my legs are cut off." And as I said that, tears just started to stream down my face. And that's the moment that became real to me. That's when I realized that my legs were really gone. This really happened. This was my real life. This was reality. This wasn't just a bad dream or a nightmare. This was my real life. And as those tears streamed down my face, she just said, "Oh honey, you're gonna be okay. You don't need your legs. You're gonna be just fine." And sometimes people have said to me, "That's so simple, that's so trite, how could she just say that?" But to be honest, that was exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to know that my best friend thought I was gonna be fine, with or without my legs. She thought I was gonna be just fine. And in the coming days, in the coming weeks and months, I was in the hospital, just doing all sorts of rehab, and I had a lot of friends and family that visited me. And one of the things they told me over and over and over and over again was, "Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here. Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here." And I remember almost getting sick of it because they said that so much, and I had no idea what God might want to do with me. It didn't really connect for me. But when I got out of the hospital, the very first weekend I got out of the hospital, I had to go back after the weekend, but I got out of the hospital for a weekend. went back home to my parents' house. And that weekend, we actually went to church. And it was a rough weekend because it was like 25 stairs up to my bedroom. And my parents had like really thick plush carpet in their house, and it just was very hard in a wheelchair. So it was not as enjoyable as I thought. And when we went to church, somebody who I didn't know, who heard about what happened to me, said something I don't ever recommend saying to anybody, but she said that she thought I would have went to hell if I died. I didn't know her, she didn't know me, but she heard about what happened to me. And I, like I said, do not recommend ever saying that to anybody, but the very good thing that came out of it, even though it was so bad, is that it sent me searching. It really sent me searching. And when I went home that day, I started to pray because everybody told me it was a miracle that I survived. I was run over by 33 freight train cars at 55 miles per hour, and I've had a number of conductors and train engineers tell me that I should have been torn to pieces. When I felt myself get sucked up, that should have continued, but something pushed me down and held me down to the ground. And I only lost my legs. And as I thought about that, I just remember thinking, you know, maybe God does have a plan for me. Maybe that's could possibly be true. And I prayed about it more and more. And not long after, this couple came to have dinner with our family. And the husband of this couple, they were friends of my sister's, and they just came to encourage us. But I found out this husband of the couple was in seminary to be a pastor. So I figured, like, of everybody that I knew, he probably knew the Bible the best. So I asked him just very honestly and candidly if he thought I would have went to hell if I died. And with all the love in the world, he just told me that every single one of us are created to be in a real and personal relationship with God. But because of our sin and because of the wrong things that we've done, we're separated from him, both in our relationship with him and in our eternal future with him. And then he told me that because of that sin, Jesus died to pay the penalty for all of our sins, past, present, and future. But we have to choose to accept Jesus for the forgiveness of our sins, and we have to choose to let him lead our lives. And when he told me that, I felt like what he was telling me was more true than anything I had ever heard in my life before. But I didn't want to just take his word for it. So I asked him to show me in the Bible. And he showed me a lot of different verses, but the verse that stood out to me the most was John 14:6. And that is where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And I remember as I read that, just thinking like, I had never made a choice or a decision to accept Jesus for the forgiveness of my sins. I had never made like a personal choice for that. And I knew, especially after trying to take my own life, that I had a lot of sin to be forgiven for. And I also knew that something very special and important seemed to be missing from my life. For really my whole life, I always felt like there was something missing. And so sitting on the floor in my parents' dining room, I just sat on the floor and I prayed this most like simple little prayer. I asked God to forgive me for everything I had ever done wrong. I asked him to forgive me for taking my own life. I realized that night that my life wasn't mine to take, that God alone gives and takes life. And I asked him to give me a new life, to make me new. And as I went to sleep that night, I just felt a little bit different. I know that that was the night that I became a Christian. I would have told you my whole life that I was a Christian, but that was the night that I became a Christian. I had never made a choice to really accept him personally, myself, until that night, and to let him lead my life. And as I went to sleep, I remember feeling just a little bit different, like I said. I felt mostly like I didn't need to worry so much about my life anymore. Mostly like one way or another, I was going to be okay. God had this under control. I was going to be okay one way or another. And sometimes I wish I could tell people it all changed overnight. You know, it was like a miraculous life transformation that night. But it was a process, and that's what it is for most people. It was a process for me. Over the next 3 years, I was actually in and out of jobs. I was in and out of psych ward, usually on the anniversary of my attempt. I was in and out of college. I was in and out of relationships. It was just a rocky time for me. But during those years, I held on to this verse that I got when I was in the hospital, actually, in a card from somebody. It was like on a magnet in a card, and it was the verse that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, but to give you a hope and a future." And in those difficult, dark, deep days of that season, I just held on to that verse, and I believe that even when I didn't have plans for myself, God had plans for me. Even when I didn't have a hope for myself, He had a hope for me. And even when I didn't have a future for myself, He had a future for me. And eventually, I met this woman who went to the community college that I went to, and she just like came up to me in the parking lot one day and shared her story with me. And after talking with her, she just like shined with more peace and joy than anybody I'd ever met before. So after talking with her, I went home and I just said to God, I want to know you the way that that lady knows you. And what I felt Him tell me was, Kristen, you have to let me be your best friend. At this point in my life, I had learned to go to my doctors, my friends, my counselors, really everybody around me for help with my problems, but I had not learned how to go to God Himself for help with my problems. And I realized that night that He was the one who made me. He was the one who made me and who knew me inside and out better than anyone else in this world. He was the one who knew my problems and the answers to them probably more than anyone else in this world. So I kind of felt like really there's no reason for me not to pray and let Him be my best friend. And so as I started to walk towards Him in that relationship and let Him be my best friend, so many things started to change. I was able to get off of some of the medications that I was taking. I started to experience more peace and more joy and a love for life that I had never had before. I had quit smoking, I quit drinking, and I started going to a really great church where there were kids my age who loved God and Jesus and wanted to live for Him and walk with Him. And I just took off spiritually. Everything just sort of changed the closer that I grew in my relationship with Him. When I started reading my Bible and started getting involved with the church and started serving, it was kind of just a process, but I have never been the same. I can't even tell you how much I changed from that day forward. And God used that to transform my family as well. My mom started coming to church with me and she became a Christian. And then she started bringing my dad to church with her and he became a Christian. Amen. And he started bringing my brother to church with him and he became a Christian. And our whole family was just continuously being transformed. We started praying together, which we just maybe sort of did at meal times before. We started talking about things we never talked about before, listening to some of the same music. And it was just really a time of redemption for us after everything that we had been through with the loss of my legs. It was a beautiful time. And right at that time, I also got baptized. And I shared my story. And after I shared my story that day, I got asked to share my story with the high school youth group at our church, and that wasn't something I really ever thought I would do. I thought like maybe I just would share it that one only time at my baptism, and then I got asked to share it with the high schoolers in our youth group, and I just thought I didn't really want anyone ever to go through what I did before they realize how good and faithful and amazing God is. And so I just prayed about it and decided I would move forward and share as openly and vulnerably as I could. And after I shared that day, almost every single one of the high schoolers came up to me and told me that they either struggled with suicidal thoughts or depression, or they knew somebody who did. And something just started to stir in me as I talked with them to help people like them because they were just like me. And not long after, I got asked to share my story at a church about an hour from here. And it was an amazing event. It was almost like I could see the chains falling off of them as they started to choose life over death, choose God over sin, and they were, giving their lives to Jesus. And I just remembered sort of standing back in awe because I knew it wasn't just me. It was God using me. It was Him working through me, working through this story. And it was most amazing to me because for some reason, it made a lot of sense to me that God would do what He did in my life to help me. I just never ever imagined He would do that, use what He did in my life to help other people. But He was doing that more and more. Every single time I shared my story, I got asked to go somewhere else. Another door would open and another door would open. And I just kept in faith, walking forward through those doors, trusting God would use it somehow, one way or another. And He did continue to use it in the most amazing ways. And as I prayed about what God wanted me to do here. What did he keep me here to do? I really felt like I was supposed to help people who struggled with suicidal thoughts and depression like I did. And so I started a ministry called Reaching You Ministries. And I started going to Moody Bible Institute, which if you knew me in high school, you would have been shocked that I would go to Bible college. But it was a very special time for me as well. I learned tons. And while I was there, I got asked to share my story on the Oprah show. And that just sort of happened. But it happened really quickly. I think it was like I agreed to go on the show and share my story one Wednesday. The next Wednesday it aired, and we got thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of emails through the website that we had started for this ministry that I had started. And I remember as I started to look through the emails, there was one in particular that stood out to me. It was written by a young man who wrote in the subject line in capital letters, "You saved my life." And as I read his story, I was in awe, because he said that day that my story aired on the Oprah show around the whole world, he was planning to take his life. He was just waiting for his mom to leave for work. And as she left for work, he walked into the living room with a gun in his hand. And as he went to turn the TV off, I was on the TV talking about how I had survived after trying to take my own life, how I was saved from death, and I was so happy to be here, how God had really changed my life, and how Jesus, was what I was living for. And he says that he got down on his knees and prayed to accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And he is now a youth pastor, leading other people to the Lord. And I remember just as I read the details of that, realizing how faithful God is for being in the details. That day, having me on the TV right when he was trying to take his own life. How he was in the details that day, how just me being run over by 33 freight train cars at 55 miles per hour, most likely being torn to pieces, pushing me down onto the ground to protect me. How he is in the details of all of our lives, in the big things and in the small things, and how he just never, ever, 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 ever gives up on us. I look back and I just think, like, he just never gave up on me. He was pursuing me that whole time. I was going through all that hard stuff, and I just didn't see how much he was really going after me and waiting for me to come into this relationship with him until I lost my legs and I really started to wake up and open my eyes. And then after I shared my story on Oprah, I also got asked to write it in a book. I had a lot of authors offer to write it for me, but there was one Christian author who had a really great story of her own who offered to do it with me. And it took us about 2 years while I was finishing college to write it, and it was for sure one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was for sure one of the best things I've ever done. It is now in 8 languages, and the book, the title that was given to it is Life in Spite of Me, and that's not really a title I can take credit for. Wasn't my idea, but my publishers came up with it, but it was just perfect, really. I couldn't have thought of a better one, because that is exactly what God did. He gave me life physically, he gave me life spiritually, he gave me life emotionally, all in spite of me, in spite of my sin, in spite of my mistakes. And now I am married. I am married a great Christian man, and he brought 2 children into my life, and we had 4 more together. And I just look back, and it's amazing for me to see how God's good plans that he always had for me all the way back here, I should put my hand to the side, when I was a teenager, continue to unfold. The kids that we've had, we named all in honor of God's grace. And the reason for that is because the best way I've ever had God's grace described to me, at least, was grace is when God gives us favor and we don't even deserve it. And I really think that's exactly what God has done. He's given me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. He gave me a new life, and he gave me a future and a hope and his peace and his joy when I didn't even deserve it. So I'm so, so, so grateful to still be here. I'm so grateful to share with you today, and I just want you to know, no matter who you are or where you've been or what you've done or what you're thinking or feeling right now, that you are not alone. Never, ever, ever are you alone. He is always with you. He is always pursuing you. He always has plans with you or for you, and he just never, ever, ever will give up. He always, always wants to help you. So if you feel alone, definitely reach out to others, but also reach out to him. Try your best to go deeper with him than you have ever gone before. There's no end to knowing him. There's so much more that he has in store for you. He wants to give you himself. He wants to give you his whole life and give you a full life. So I just want to encourage you to seek him so that you can know him in the most profound way than you ever have before. And if you are struggling with suicidal thoughts or depression, to reach out for help. There's a lot of leaders here that you can talk to, other people in your life that you can talk to, and I just want to encourage you to keep reaching out until you get all the help that you need. Don't ever stop asking for help. You are not alone. There are so many people just like you, no matter what you're going through. There are many people who are going through the same thing that you are going through, and lean on each other as well. Don't ever try to do it alone. You are meant to be in community. You are meant for a purpose. Even if you feel like you are a mistake or an accident, that is not true. You are for sure, certainly here for a purpose. And it's going to get better. Things will get better. There will be ups and downs, but there will be so many good moments. And you have a lot to look forward to. So don't ever give up. Keep fighting, keep trying, and never ever doubt that God has a plan for you. You are here for a purpose. Thank you so much.